Imagine yourself at the helm of a ship sailing across the vast, unpredictable ocean of life. Sometimes the waters are calm, the sun is warm on your face, and the journey feels effortless. But then, without warning, the sky darkens. The winds begin to howl, and the waves rise up like angry mountains, tossing your small vessel back and forth. In these moments of chaos, of turmoil, what is your first instinct? Is it to curse the storm, to lament the unforgiving sea, to feel a rising tide of panic, believing that your ship and your spirit will surely be broken against the waves? Most of us would say yes. It's a natural human reaction. But what if I told you that the storm is not your greatest challenge? What if the true battle is not waged against the wind and the water, but right here, inside your own mind? What if the key to navigating any storm, no matter how fierce, lies not in controlling the weather, but in mastering the helm within? This is not a new idea. For over 2,000 years, a group of profound thinkers, emperors, playwrights, slaves, and statesmen grappled with this very question. They lived through wars, plagues, political betrayals, and personal tragedies far exceeding what most of us will ever face. And yet, they discovered a way to find not just survival, but serenity. Not just endurance, but a deep, unshakable peace. They were the Stoics, and the philosophy they forged was not a set of abstract theories for dusty books, but a practical, life-altering compass for the human soul. Over the course of our journey together, we will explore 15 of their most powerful lessons, practical tools that can help you build what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a fortress of the mind, a sanctuary of calm that no external event, no matter how chaotic, can ever breach. And our first step, the very cornerstone upon which this entire citadel is built, is perhaps the most revolutionary and liberating idea of all. It was expressed most clearly by the former slave who became one of Stoicism's most influential teachers, Epictetus. He taught quite simply that it is not events that disturb us, but our judgment about events. Let that sink in for a moment. It's a statement so simple it almost seems dismissible, yet it holds the power to completely reframe our existence. Life itself, the Stoics argued, is neutral. The events that unfold, a lost job, a difficult diagnosis, a criticism from a loved one, a traffic jam, on the way to an important meeting, are in their raw form just facts. They are like the wind and the rain. They exist, they happen, but they have no inherent power to make you feel angry or sad or defeated. All of that, the entire emotional texture of your life, comes from one place and one place only: the meaning you assign to those facts. The story you tell yourself about what has happened. We all walk through life looking through a lens. This lens is crafted from our past experiences, our fears, our hopes, and our beliefs. For some, the lens is tinted with pessimism, and so even a sunny day holds the threat of a future storm. For others, the lens is warped by insecurity, and so a neutral comment from a colleague is perceived as a veiled insult. And for others still, the lens is clouded with regret, causing them to see every new opportunity only through the shadow of past failures. The Stoics are asking us to do something radical, to become aware of the lens itself, to realize that we don't just see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. When you begin to grasp this, you begin to understand that your mind can be one of two things. It can be an inescapable prison, or it can be your ultimate path to freedom. The prison is built when we chain our well-being to external events. We tell ourselves, I will be happy when I get that promotion, or my day is ruined because my car broke down, or I am a failure because that project didn't succeed. In this prison, we are perpetually at the mercy of things we cannot control. We are passive victims of circumstance, our mood dictated by the whims of fortune, the opinions of others, and the unpredictable nature of the world. The walls of this prison are forged from our own reactive judgments, but the mind can also be your path to freedom. This freedom is what the Stoics cherished above all else. It is an internal freedom that can exist even in the most dire of external circumstances. Consider the life of James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy Vice Admiral who was held as a prisoner of war in Vietnam for over 7 years. He was repeatedly tortured, kept in solitary confinement, and lived with constant uncertainty and physical pain. He had zero control over his external world. By any objective measure, his situation was horrific. Yet Stockdale survived, and he did more than survive. He led his fellow prisoners with courage and resolve. How? Because long before he was captured, he had studied the teachings of Epictetus. Stockdale understood that while his captors could imprison and break his body, they could never touch his mind. They could not control his judgments, his character, or his will. He made a crucial distinction. The event was that he was a prisoner of war. The judgment was that he would not allow this event to break his spirit or compromise his principles. He knew that the beatings and the isolation were external things happening to him, but the choice to despair, to give up, to lose his humanity, that choice was his and his alone. His mind, even in the darkest of cells, became his invincible citadel, his path to an inner freedom that his torturers could never take away. This is a profound and powerful example, but the principle applies to every single one of us in our daily lives. You may not be a prisoner of war, but you might feel imprisoned by a toxic work environment, a difficult relationship, or a chronic sense of anxiety. The Stoic lesson is that the source of that feeling of being trapped is not the job, the person, or the anxiety itself. It is the judgment that you are powerless against them. It is the story you tell yourself that says, "This is unbearable, and I have no way out." The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous Stoic, wrote in his private journal, a book we now know as Meditations. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Think about that alchemy. The mind can take the very thing that seems to be blocking you and transform it into the fuel for your journey forward. A difficult conversation you've been dreading is not an obstacle to be avoided. It is the path to clarity and stronger boundaries. A creative block is not a sign of failure. It is the path to exploring new methods and deepening your craft. A financial setback is not the end of the road. It is the path to learning resilience, resourcefulness, and what you truly value in life. This is the shift from a victim mindset to a creator mindset. And it begins with a simple conscious practice. The next time you feel a surge of negative emotion, anger, frustration, sadness, fear, I want you to try something. Pause, just for a second. Before you react, before you speak, before you let the feeling consume you, ask yourself this question. Is this feeling coming from the event itself or from the story I am telling myself about this event? You're stuck in traffic. The event is a line of cars. The story is, this is a disaster. I'm going to be late. My boss will be furious. This always happens to me. My day is ruined. Can you see the difference? The event is neutral. The story is the source of the suffering. In that pause, you give yourself a choice. You can choose to keep believing the catastrophic story, or you can choose a different one, a more rational one. I am in traffic. I will text my boss to let them know I am running late. I cannot control the traffic, but I can control my breathing. I can use this time to listen to a chapter of my audiobook. This is not about pretending that negative things don't happen. It's not about toxic positivity or suppressing your feelings. It is about recognizing where your feelings truly come from. It's about reclaiming your power. It is the first, most fundamental step in building your inner citadel. You realize that you are the architect of your own experience. The world outside will always be unpredictable. People will act in ways you don't like. Fortune will be fickle. Storms will come. But the key to your peace, the key to your freedom, has been inside you all along. It is your ability to choose your response, to choose your perspective, to choose your story. And this brings us to a crucial and perhaps more intimate part of our journey. If we are to master our inner world, we must first become detectives of it. We must learn to listen to that inner narrator, to observe the very stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that our mind weaves around the clock. Because it is in understanding these stories that we can begin to consciously rewrite them. And that is precisely where we will venture in our next session together. In our last conversation, we laid the first stone of our inner citadel. We discovered the profound and liberating truth that our suffering comes not from the events of our lives, but from the judgments we make about them. This realization is the key that can unlock us from the prison of reactivity. But once we have that key in our hand, we are faced with a new, more subtle challenge. It's not enough to simply know that our judgments shape our reality. We must now become explorers of that inner landscape where these judgments are born. We must learn to listen with patient and non-judgmental ears to the stories we tell ourselves. Think of it like this. There is a narrator living inside your mind. This narrator is with you from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. And sometimes it even populates your dreams. It's a tireless storyteller, constantly weaving narratives around every experience you have. It interprets it, analyzes it, predicts it, remembers. When you receive a short one-line email from your boss, this narrator immediately crafts a story. Is she angry with me? Did I do something wrong? This must be about that report I submitted. I'm probably in trouble. When you're invited to a social gathering where you don't know many people, the narrator whispers a tale of caution. This will be awkward. You won't have anything to say. People will think you're boring. You'll just stand in a corner all night. Most of the time, this inner narrator operates on autopilot running in the background of our consciousness, and we accept its stories as undeniable truth. We don't even recognize them as stories. We hear them as reality. The anxiety that tightens your chest, the fear that makes your palms sweat, the sadness that weighs on your spirit, these are the physiological responses to the narratives your mind is creating. You are, in essence, living inside a movie that your own mind is directing, and you've forgotten that you were the director. This brings us to our second foundational lesson from the Stoics. You must learn to observe the stories you tell yourself and recognize that you are not your thoughts. The great Stoic playwright and philosopher Seneca, who served as an advisor to the infamous Emperor Nero, knew this intimately. He lived in a world of constant intrigue, danger, and political volatility. He once wrote a letter to his friend Lucilius, and in it, he offered this timeless piece of wisdom: we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is a breathtaking insight. It suggests that the vast majority of our pain is self-inflicted, born not from the sharp edges of the present moment, but from the phantoms of a future we have imagined. The presentation you're dreading next week hasn't happened yet, but you have suffered through its imagined failure 100 times in your mind. The difficult conversation you need to have isn't taking place right now, but you have already felt the sting of its imagined rejection. Modern psychology has a name for this tendency: catastrophizing. It's the habit of taking a single negative event, or even the possibility of one, and spinning it into the worst-case scenario imaginable. It's a cognitive distortion, a glitch in our mental software that served our ancient ancestors well when they needed to be hyper-vigilant about a rustle in the bushes that could be a predator. But in our modern world, this mechanism often misfires, turning a simple challenge into a full-blown crisis. Our minds, in this sense, are like a movie projector. The raw event, the email, the invitation, the deadline is the plain, unexposed film. But our mind, the projector, shines a light through it, and on that light, it layers on all sorts of dramatic colors, ominous music and special effects, drawn from our library of past fears and insecurities. What appears on the screen of our consciousness is not the raw event, but a highly produced, often terrifying feature film. The Stoic practice, then, is to learn how to step behind the projector. It's to see the machine at work, to understand that the drama is being created, and to realize that you have the power to change the film, or at the very least to stop believing that the movie is real. This practice is a form of mindfulness, but perhaps not the kind you're most familiar with. It is not about emptying the mind or chanting mantras to achieve a state of blissful nothingness. Stoic mindfulness is an active, engaged observation. It is the practice of paying attention to your thoughts on purpose in the present moment and without judgment. When that familiar wave of anxiety rises, you don't try to crush it or run from it. You turn toward it with a gentle curiosity. You observe it. You might say to yourself, there is anxiety. I feel a tightness in my chest. My mind is telling me a story that I am going to fail. By creating this separation, by stepping into the role of the observer, you do something miraculous. You stop identifying with the thought and the emotion. The thought is no longer, I am going to fail. It becomes, I am having the thought that I am going to fail. The feeling is no longer, I am anxious. It becomes, I am experiencing the feeling of anxiety. This small linguistic shift reflects a monumental shift in perspective. You are no longer the thought. You are the one who is aware of the thought. In that space between the observer and the thought lies your freedom. The brilliant psychologist Carl Jung touched upon this same deep truth from a different angle. He famously stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is precisely what happens with the stories we tell ourselves. These narratives often formed in childhood or through past traumas run in the unconscious depths of our minds. We don't notice them, but they dictate our reactions, our moods, and our choices. The person who constantly believes "I'm not good enough" will unconsciously sabotage opportunities for success. The person who holds the narrative "you can't trust anyone" will unconsciously push away genuine connection. And they will look at the results of their lives, the missed promotions, the lonely evenings, and call it fate, bad luck, or just the way life is. The Stoic and the Jungian paths converge here. Both call for the brave work of bringing these unconscious patterns into the light of awareness. The practice is to start questioning the validity of your inner narrator. When your mind starts spinning a catastrophic tale, you can gently interject with questions. Is this story 100% true? What evidence do I have to support it? Is there another way, a more compassionate or rational way to look at this situation? Let's return to the example of the social gathering. Your mind narrates a story of awkwardness and judgment, but you can challenge it. Is it really true that everyone will be judging me? Isn't it more likely that most people are focused on their own conversations and their own anxieties? Have I been to parties before where I ended up having a pleasant conversation with someone? Yes. So, is the story of guaranteed failure the only possible outcome? By engaging in this gentle internal dialogue, you are not suppressing your feelings. You are investigating them. You are becoming a wise and compassionate leader for your own mind, guiding it away from the dark alleys of fear and towards the open fields of possibility. You are showing it that its first reactive story is not the only story available. This practice takes time. It is the work of a lifetime. Your inner narrator has been running the show for decades, and it will not cede control overnight. Be patient with yourself. The goal is not to silence the narrator. That's impossible. The goal is to cultivate a new relationship with it, a relationship of conscious awareness rather than unconscious belief. You learn to listen to its stories with a bit of healthy skepticism, as you might listen to a town gossip who is known for exaggeration. You hear the story, you acknowledge it, but you don't have to build your house on its shaky foundation. So, the second lesson is this: begin the practice of observation. Throughout your day, try to notice the stories your mind is telling you, especially when you feel strong emotions. Don't fight them. Don't judge them. Just notice them. Acknowledge them. My mind is telling me a story of fear right now. This simple act is the beginning of all transformation. It is how you move from being a character in the movie to becoming the director. It's how you make the unconscious conscious. And as we become more adept at simply seeing these stories for what they are, mental events, not objective reality, we are naturally led to our next inquiry. What is the fuel that powers these stories, particularly the most painful ones? Very often that fuel is fear. And understanding the true nature of fear, dissecting it, and learning to act in spite of it is the next critical stone we must lay in the foundation of our inner citadel. In our last exploration, we ventured into the inner world of the mind and began the practice of observing the stories our inner narrator constantly tells us. We learned to create a space between ourselves and our thoughts, to see them not as absolute truth, but as mental events passing through our awareness. And as we become more adept at this practice, we inevitably begin to notice a recurring theme. We notice the primary ink with which the most painful and restrictive of these stories are written. That ink is fear. Fear is perhaps the most primal and powerful of human emotions. It is the architect of our anxieties, the ghostwriter of our self-doubt. It's the force that whispers caution in our ear until caution turns into paralysis. It tells us not to apply for the job because we fear rejection. It tells us not to speak our truth because we fear conflict. It tells us not to pursue our dreams because we fear failure. Fear, more than anything else, is what keeps our world small and our spirits tethered. And so, we arrive at our third crucial lesson, a direct confrontation with this powerful force guided by the wisdom of the Stoics. This lesson is simple to state, yet profound in its application. Most of what you fear will never come to pass, and courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway. The Stoics were masters at dissecting fear. They saw it not as a mystical force that descended upon them, but as a product of the human mind, an act of imagination. Specifically, they saw fear as an anxious projection into the future. It's almost never about what is happening in this present moment. Right now, in this second, you are safe. you are breathing. The catastrophe you're worried about is just a thought, a story about a future that does not yet exist, and in all likelihood, never will. Seneca, whose wisdom we touched upon earlier, was brilliant on this topic. He understood that the human mind has a unique capacity for time travel, and it often uses this ability to import suffering from the future into the present. He wrote, "There are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." I want you to truly consider the weight of that statement. We suffer more in imagination. The mental anguish, the sleepless nights, the days spent in a state of low-grade dread, all of this is a tax we pay to a future that rarely, if ever, comes to collect. Think about the last time you were truly gripped by fear. Was it about something that was actually happening or something that might happen? You feared the results of a medical test. You feared a difficult performance review. You feared that your children might get into trouble. You lived through the potential pain of those events many times over in your mind. But what was the actual outcome? Often the test results are fine. The review, even if critical, is manageable. Your children navigate their challenges. The imagined disaster almost never materializes with the same terrifying intensity that our minds created. The actual event, when it arrives, is often far less intimidating than the ghosts we wrestled with in our own heads. So what do? If fear is a product of a catastrophizing imagination, how do we rein in that imagination? The Stoics offered a surprisingly counterintuitive but incredibly effective tool. Modern therapists might call it exposure therapy or decatastrophizing, but the Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Now, that sounds rather grim, but the practice itself is deeply calming. It does not mean dwelling morbidly on everything that could go wrong. Rather, it is a calm, rational exercise in looking your fears squarely in the eye. It works like this when you find yourself anxious about a future event. Instead of pushing the fear away, you sit with it and calmly, deliberately walk through the worst-case scenario. You write it down. You dissect it. What is the absolute worst thing that could happen? Let's use a common example. You have to give a major presentation at work. The fear begins to build. Your inner narrator starts its horror story. I'm going to forget my lines. My voice will shake. People will think my ideas are foolish. I'll be humiliated. My career will be over. This vague, monstrous cloud of fear is paralyzing. Now, apply the Stoic practice. You sit down and calmly ask, okay, what's the worst that could realistically happen? I might stumble over a few words. And what would happen then? I would pause, take a breath, and continue. People might notice, but most will be sympathetic. Okay, what else? Someone might ask a challenging question I can't answer perfectly. And what would happen then? I could say, that's an excellent question, I'd like to give it some more thought and get back to you. It shows I'm thoughtful, not incompetent. What is the ultimate worst-case scenario? The presentation goes poorly, my boss is disappointed, and then I would feel bad for a day or two. I would reflect on what went wrong and prepare better next time. My career will not be over. Life will go on. Eli, do you see what happens in this process? When you drag the monster out from the shadows of your imagination and into the clear light of rational thought, you often discover it's not a monster at all. It's manageable. It's survivable. By calmly contemplating the worst-case scenario, you rob it of its power to terrorize you. The fear was thriving on vagueness and uncertainty. By defining it, you contain it. You realize that even if the worst were to happen, you would handle it. You are more resilient than your fear gives you credit for. This practice leads to a profound realization. Courage is not about being fearless. The Stoics were not emotionless robots. They felt fear just as we do. For them, courage was a decision. It was the logical conclusion that the cost of inaction, the cost of letting fear keep you small and stuck, was far greater than the potential cost of the thing you feared. Carl Jung echoed this when he wrote, "Fear is a reaction, courage is a decision." You cannot control the initial reaction of fear, but you always have the power to make the decision that follows. The decision is to act in spite of the fear, to take one step, to send the email, to make the call, to walk onto the stage even if your knees are trembling. And what you find almost universally is that action is the true antidote to fear. Fear cannot survive in the face of forward momentum. It thrives in the stagnation of overthinking and hesitation. But when you move towards the thing you fear, your mind shifts its focus from imagining failure to navigating the task at hand. Your confidence doesn't come before the act, it is the consequence of the act. So, this is our task: to become calm observers of our fears, to see them as stories our imagination tells us about the future. We can then rationally examine those stories, even premeditate the worst outcomes, only to find that we have the strength to survive them. And with that knowledge, we can make a decision. We can choose courage. We can choose to act. And this very act of choosing to move forward, of taking control and engaging with the world, not from a place of fear, but from a place of purpose, is the next great pillar of our inner citadel. It is the understanding that while we cannot always control the outcome, we are always in control of our own actions. And learning to wield that power is where our journey must take us next. In our journey so far, we have stood at the helm of our own perception, learning that we are the ones who give meaning to the events of our lives. We have become detectives of our own minds, observing the stories we tell ourselves. And we have stood face to face with fear, learning to dissect it with reason and finding the courage to act in spite of it. This decision to act, to move forward with purpose rather than being paralyzed by fear, is a monumental step. But it immediately raises a critical question: where do we direct our energy? In this vast complex world with its infinite variables and unpredictable forces, where should we focus our efforts to live a good, peaceful, and effective life? The Stoics answered this question with what is arguably their most famous, most practical, and most profoundly calming principle. It is the very operating system for a tranquil mind, the central pillar of our inner citadel. This is our fourth lesson, delivered most powerfully by Epictetus, who began his great work, the Enchiridion, or Handbook, with this very idea. He tells us, some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. This is the dichotomy of control. It is a simple, clean, and radical division of all human experience into two distinct categories. On one side, you have the things that are completely and utterly within your power. What are they? The Stoics are very specific. They include your judgments, your opinions, your intentions, your desires, your aversions. In short, the entire workings of your own mind and your own will. They are your chosen actions, your character, the effort you put forth. On the other side of this line, you have everything else, literally everything else in the universe. This category includes your body. You can influence your health, but you cannot command it to be free from illness or injury. It includes your possessions and your wealth. They can be lost through no fault of your own. It includes your reputation, for you cannot control what others think or say about you. It includes the actions of other people, the weather, the past, the future, and the outcome of your efforts. All of these things are not up to us. They are external, and they are ultimately beyond our direct control. The entire art of living a Stoic life, the secret to tranquility and effectiveness, lies in learning to clearly distinguish between these two categories in every situation, and then committing wholeheartedly to focusing your energy only on the first category, while gracefully accepting the reality of the second. To understand the power of this, let's use a classic Stoic analogy: the archer. Imagine an archer preparing for a competition. What is within her control? She can control the countless hours of practice she puts in beforehand. She can control the quality of her bow and arrows, ensuring they are perfectly maintained. On the day of the competition, she can control her diet and her sleep to be in peak physical condition. As she steps up to the line, she can control her stance, the way she holds the bow, the tension in the string. She can control her breathing, calming her heart rate. She can control the precise moment she chooses to release the arrow. All of this, her preparation, her focus, her action, is up to her. Her excellence as an archer is defined by how well she executes these things. But the moment the arrow leaves the bow, it enters the second category. It enters the realm of things that are not up to her. A sudden unseen gust of wind might push the arrow off course. The target might have a hidden flaw that causes the arrow to bounce off. Another competitor might perform even more brilliantly. The final outcome, whether the arrow hits the bullseye, whether she wins the competition, is ultimately not within her complete control. Now, consider two different mindsets for this archer. The first archer attaches her entire sense of self-worth and peace of mind to the outcome. If the arrow goes wide, she is a failure. She becomes enraged by the wind, she is crushed by defeat. She is filled with anxiety about things she cannot manage. Her inner peace is as unpredictable as the weather. The second archer is a Stoic archer. She also wants to win. She also aims for the bullseye, but she understands the dichotomy of control. She places her focus and her satisfaction on what is up to her. Did I prepare with diligence? Did I execute my shot with the best of my ability? Did I maintain my composure and focus? If the answer is yes, then she has succeeded regardless of where the arrow lands. She can learn from a missed shot, but she does not allow it to shatter her inner tranquility. She accepts the role of the wind of fortune with a calm indifference. She has done her part. The rest is not her business. Which of these archers do you think lives a more peaceful, resilient, and ultimately more effective life? We are all this archer every single day. You are preparing for a job interview. You can control your research, your practice, the suit you wear, the thoughtful questions you prepare. You cannot control the interviewer's mood. The other candidates are the company's final decision. The Stoic path is to pour all your energy into your preparation and performance, and then let go of the outcome. You are in a relationship. You can control being a kind, patient, loving, and supportive partner. You can control your own actions and your own integrity. You cannot control your partner's feelings, their reactions, or their choices. To try and control them is the path to frustration and misery. The Stoic path is to focus on being the best partner you can be and to accept their autonomy. This principle is the ultimate antidote to anxiety. Why? Because anxiety is almost always rooted in trying to mentally manage the things that are not up to us. We worry about what others will think. We worry about the future. We worry about outcomes. We are trying to be the archer who controls the wind. It's an exhausting, impossible task that guarantees a life of frustration. When you truly internalize the dichotomy of control, a profound sense of liberation occurs. You are freed from the enormous burden of trying to manage the universe. You are given a much smaller, more specific, and infinitely more meaningful area of responsibility. Your own choices, your own character, your own responses. This doesn't mean you become passive. This is not a philosophy of resignation. The Stoic archer doesn't just shrug and shoot arrows randomly. No, she practices with more diligence than anyone because she knows her effort is the only thing that truly belongs to her. This is a philosophy of focused, purposeful action. It directs your finite time and energy away from fruitless worry and towards productive, meaningful work within your own sphere of control. It teaches you to love the process, not just the prize. So, here is the practice. In any situation that causes you stress, pause and perform a mental inventory. Draw a line down a piece of paper or just in your mind. On one side, list the things that are entirely up to you in this situation. On the other list, the things that are not. Be honest and rigorous. You will likely find that the first list, the one you control, is much shorter, but it is also where 100% of your power lies. Your task is to dedicate yourself fully to the first list and to practice a calm, accepting indifference to the second. This is the work. This is the training. This is how you build a fortress within a place of peace that doesn't depend on the arrow hitting the target, but on the grace and skill with which it was released. This profound understanding that our power lies not in controlling outcomes, but in directing our own willful actions naturally leads us to our next question. If our actions are our true domain, how do we overcome the internal resistance, the doubt and hesitation that so often prevents us from acting at all? We must now explore the Stoic remedy for the paralysis of overthinking, and that is where our journey will continue. In our last meeting, we drew a powerful line in the sand of our experience. We stood with the Stoic archer and learned to distinguish between what is truly up to us and what is not. This is the dichotomy of control, a principle that when practiced frees us from the immense and exhausting burden of trying to manage the universe. It allows us to redirect our precious energy away from fruitless worry and focus it squarely on our own chosen actions, our own efforts, our own character. It gives us a clear and defined field on which to play the game of life. But here we encounter a paradox that plagues so many of us. Even when we know what is within our control, even when we see the path forward, we often find ourselves stuck. We stand at the edge of action, frozen by a fog of doubt, hesitation, and overthinking. The mind, which we've identified as the source of our judgments, can become a master of delay. It tells us, wait for the perfect moment. You're not ready yet. What if you fail? Let's just think about it a little bit more. And so, we stand still, and in that stillness, the fog of doubt thickens until it becomes an impenetrable wall. This brings us to the fifth and perhaps most dynamic of the Stoic lessons. It is the remedy for this paralysis, the force that dispels the fog. This lesson is a call to motion. Action is the antidote to doubt, and its corollary is just as crucial. Stop complaining, for it trains your mind to be powerless. Let's first look at doubt. Doubt is a close cousin of fear. It's a story we tell ourselves about our own inadequacy in the face of a challenge. And it is a creature that thrives in the ecosystem of inaction. When you are still, when you are merely thinking, planning, and pondering, you create a fertile ground for doubt to grow. It whispers and metastasizes in the quiet chambers of your mind. The longer you wait to act, the more powerful its voice becomes, until you are convinced that the risk is too great, the task too daunting. You have thought yourself into a state of paralysis. The Stoics understood this profoundly. They were men of action, emperors, senators, generals. They knew that clarity does not come from endless deliberation. It comes from engagement with the world. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is the byproduct of action. You don't think your way into a state of courage. You act your way into it. The key is to understand that the action required to break this spell does not have to be a monumental leap. In fact, thinking that the first step must be huge is just another trick the mind uses to keep you frozen. The antidote is the small, sometimes trivial step. It's the act of putting on your running shoes even if you don't go for a run. It's opening a blank document and writing a single sentence. It's picking up the phone even if you don't dial the number right away. These tiny acts of volition break the spell of inertia. They send a powerful message back to the doubting mind. See, I am moving. I am in control. And this small movement creates momentum. Momentum creates the next movement. And soon, you find you are walking, and the fog is beginning to lift. Now, let's turn to the other side of this coin, the corrosive habit of complaining. If action is the expression of your power within your circle of control, complaining is the abdication of that power. It is the act of focusing all your mental and emotional energy on the things you have already identified as being not up to you. When you complain about the traffic, your difficult boss, the state of the economy, or how unfairly you've been treated, what are you actually doing? You are verbally caressing your problems. You are reinforcing a narrative in which you are the victim and the world is the aggressor. It might provide a fleeting moment of catharsis, a small hit of validation from a sympathetic listener, but it is a deeply disempowering act. It trains your brain to scan the world for problems rather than solutions. It anchors your identity in what is wrong with the world, rather than in what you can do to make your own corner of it right. Complaining is the lullaby of helplessness. The Stoic response is not to pretend that things aren't difficult or unfair. It is to consciously pivot your focus. When the urge to complain arises, see it as a signal to look for the action. Instead of saying, "My job is so draining and my boss doesn't appreciate me," the Stoic asks, "What is within my control here? I can't control my boss's personality, but I can control the quality of my own work. I can control updating my resume. I can control setting clear boundaries about my work hours. I can control my search for a new position." Each of those "I can" statements is a step. It's an action. It reclaims the power that complaining so readily gives away. One of the great American presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, had a philosophy that resonated deeply with this Stoic principle. He said, "In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing." The Stoics would agree. Even a misstep in action that leads to a mistake is infinitely more valuable than the paralysis of doing nothing. Why? Because a mistake provides feedback. It is data. It is a lesson that you can use to adjust your course. Inaction teaches you nothing except how to be better at being inactive. So, the practice is this. When you feel the cold grip of doubt, shrink the first step until it is so small you cannot possibly say no to it. Break the inertia. And when you feel the hot sting of frustration and the urge to complain, use it as a trigger to ask the most empowering question. What is the next small action I can take that is within my control? You will find that taking that action, no matter how minor, does more to soothe your frustration than an hour of venting ever could. Because you are no longer just a spectator to your own life, narrating its difficulties from the sidelines. You are an active participant. You are the archer, focusing not on the wind, but on the deliberate, powerful act of drawing the bow. And this is where our journey takes another fascinating turn. For what happens when you repeat these small, deliberate actions day after day? What happens when you consistently choose the active response over the passive complaint? You begin to build something. You begin to sculpt something. These individual actions start to coalesce and harden into habits. And those habits in turn begin to form the very essence of your character. This realization that we are not what we think or say, but what we repeatedly do, is the next great secret to building the inner citadel. And it is there that we will travel together next. We have journeyed together to a place of profound empowerment. We've learned to focus our energy on the circle of things within our control, and we've discovered that the simplest action is a powerful antidote to the paralysis of doubt and the poison of complaint. We have chosen to become the archer, focusing on the grace of our own release rather than the fickle flight of the arrow. But this raises a question that gets to the very heart of who we are. What is the long-term effect of these choices? What happens when we choose action over inaction day after day, week after week? The answer is that these individual actions, like single drops of water, begin to carve channels in the landscape of our lives. They coalesce into streams, then into powerful rivers. These are our habits. And these habits in turn do something miraculous and terrifying. They sculpt our very identity. This leads us to our sixth and perhaps most defining lesson from the ancients: you are what you repeatedly do. And as a direct consequence of this truth, trust, especially trust in yourself, is not a gift, but a reputation you earn with your own actions. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, who was a teacher to Alexander the Great and whose ideas deeply influenced the Stoics, put it most famously: we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. This is one of the most crucial pieces of wisdom you will ever encounter, because it shatters a common illusion about who we are. Many of us walk through life defining ourselves by our intentions, our aspirations, or our potential. We think of ourselves as a creative person who just hasn't had time to create, or a disciplined person who will start their routine on Monday, or a kind person who was just having a bad day. The Stoics would gently but firmly disagree. They would argue that you are not the person you intend to be. You are the person your actions reveal you to be day in and day out. You are not a writer because you have great ideas. You are a writer because you write. You are not a healthy person because you own a gym membership. You are a healthy person because you go to the gym. Your identity is not a declaration. It is a lagging indicator of your habits. When we grasp this, we understand that changing who we are is not a matter of wishful thinking or grand pronouncements. It is a matter of painstakingly, deliberately changing what we do on a regular basis. And this is where the vital concept of self-trust enters the picture. Think of self-trust as a reputation. We understand this intuitively with other people. If you have a friend who consistently keeps their word, shows up on time, and does what they say they will do, you develop a strong reputation for them in your mind. You trust them. If another friend is constantly late, cancels plans, and fails to follow through, their reputation suffers. You learn that you cannot rely on them. Now, apply that same logic to the most important relationship you will ever have, the one you have with yourself. Every single day, you make dozens of small promises to yourself. I'll wake up when the alarm goes off. I'll eat a healthy lunch. I'll finish that report before I watch television. I won't lose my temper during that meeting. Each of these is a small test of your own integrity. Every time you keep one of these promises, no matter how small, you are making a deposit into what we can call your self-trust account. It's a small affirmation that says, I can rely on me. My word is good even when no one is watching. Every time you break a promise, you hit the snooze button. You eat the junk food, you procrastinate, you make a withdrawal. You send a subtle message to your subconscious, my word doesn't mean much. I can't be counted on. If you consistently make more withdrawals than deposits, you will eventually find your self-trust account overdrawn. And the result of that is a deep and pervasive lack of confidence. You will hesitate to set ambitious goals because deep down, you've built a reputation with yourself as someone who doesn't follow through. You won't trust yourself to handle the challenges that come with growth. This is why the Stoics were so focused on daily discipline and routine. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, began his mornings with a struggle just like us. He wrote in his meditations, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for?" He wasn't just talking about his duty as emperor. He was talking about his duty to his own character. Getting out of bed was the first promise he kept to himself each day. It was the first deposit into his account. This is how you build an unshakable character. It's not through one or two heroic acts. It is through the mundane, unglamorous, and consistent victory in these small daily battles. It's in choosing the salad over the fries. It's in doing the 10 minutes of exercise you promised yourself. It's in making the difficult phone call you've been avoiding. The outside world may not see these victories. There are no trophies for them. But your nervous system sees them. Your subconscious sees them. And it is upon the foundation of these tiny repeated acts of integrity that a profound sense of self-respect is built. The practical application of this is to shift your focus from transforming your life to simply keeping the next promise. Make the promise so small and so specific that it is almost impossible to break. Don't promise to get in shape. Promise to walk around the block after dinner tonight, and then do it. The goal is not the walk itself. The goal is the act of keeping your word to yourself. The goal is the deposit. Tomorrow you can make the promise to walk a little further. Each promise kept builds the muscle of your integrity. Over time, you build a powerful reputation with yourself as someone who is reliable, disciplined, and trustworthy. And a person who deeply trusts themselves is capable of weathering any storm. They have an inner certainty that is not dependent on external validation. They have built their inner citadel brick by brick with the mortar of promises kept. This process of forging character through habit of earning your own trust through consistent action cultivates a powerful sense of self-reliance. You begin to understand that the resources you need are not somewhere out there. They are being built day by day, right here within you. This leads us to a stark and empowering realization that is central to a life of freedom and dignity, a truth we must embrace if we are to be truly sovereign individuals. It is there we will go next. We have journeyed deep into the architecture of the self. We've seen that our identity is not a fixed monument we are born with, but a living sculpture that we ourselves carve chisel stroke by chisel stroke with the habits we form and the promises we keep. Through this patient daily work of acting with integrity, we build a formidable reputation with ourselves. We forge a deep and abiding self-trust. This internal foundation is the bedrock of the inner citadel. And once this foundation is firm, we are ready to face one of life's most stark, sobering, and ultimately liberating truths. It is a lesson that cuts through the noise of wishful thinking and passive hope. It is the seventh great lesson of our Stoic path, and it is this: no one is coming to save you. You must be your own rescue. This statement may land with a certain coldness. It seems to dismiss the comfort of hope and the kindness of others, but that is not its purpose. Its purpose is to awaken you to your own power. Deep within the human psyche, there often lies a subtle, pervasive fantasy, the fantasy of the rescuer. It's a story we learn as children in fairy tales of knights in shining armor and fairy godmothers. As adults, the story changes form, but it often remains. We wait. We wait for the perfect partner to come and complete us. We wait for the brilliant boss to finally recognize our genius and promote us. We wait for a sudden windfall of money to solve our problems, for a government to create the perfect society, for some external event or person to arrive and finally grant us permission to live the life we want. This waiting is a form of gentle self-imposed imprisonment. It keeps us in a state of suspended animation, our own potential held hostage by a future that may never arrive. We place the key to our own happiness in someone else's pocket. The Stoics saw this as a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of a good life. A life of virtue, dignity, and tranquility could never be a gift bestowed by another. It had to be an achievement earned through one's own reason and will. To be your own rescue is to embrace what we might call radical responsibility. This doesn't mean you blame yourself for events outside of your control, like a natural disaster or a global pandemic. That would violate the dichotomy of control we have already established. Rather, radical responsibility means taking absolute 100% ownership of your responses to those events. It means you stop pointing fingers. You stop blaming your past, your parents, your circumstances, or your luck for your present condition. You acknowledge the reality of those factors, yes, but you decisively claim ownership of the path forward. Consider the person stuck in a job they find meaningless. For years, they can exist in a state of waiting. They complain about their work dream of a better career and hope that one day things will magically change. They are waiting for a rescuer, a new CEO, a sudden corporate restructuring, a headhunter's call out of the blue. Their life is on hold. The moment of rescue, of self-rescue, is the moment they stop waiting. It is the moment they say, "No one is coming. The responsibility for my career satisfaction is mine and mine alone." That evening, instead of just dreaming, they take a small, concrete action. They spend 30 minutes researching online courses for a skill they've always wanted to learn. The next day, they reach out to one person on a professional network for an informational interview. The week after, they create a budget to see how they could afford a transition. They are no longer waiting for the ship to come in. They are building their own raft, plank by plank, in the quiet of the evening. They have become their own rescue. The psychologist Carl Jung, whose work so often mirrors these ancient truths, articulated this beautifully. He wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The fantasy of the rescuer is the ultimate act of looking outside. It is a dream. The act of self-rescue, of taking radical responsibility, is the process of looking inside and awakening to the power that was there all along. When you fully embrace this, your entire orientation to life shifts. You no longer see yourself as a passive object to which things happen. You see yourself as an active agent, a creator. Problems cease to be unjust, burdens inflicted upon you. They become challenges for you to solve, obstacles for you to navigate. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And you start asking, "What am I going to do about it?" The first question is the question of a victim. The second is the question of a leader, the leader of your own life. This does not mean you must isolate yourself or refuse help from others. The Stoics valued community and friendship. You can and should accept help when it is offered with kindness, but you do not depend on it for your fundamental well-being or sense of agency. You are grateful for the help, but your plan A, B, and C is always your own deliberate action. Help from others becomes a welcome bonus, not a desperate necessity. Living this way cultivates a deep, quiet confidence that is rooted not in arrogance, but in competence. It is the confidence of the person who knows they can handle things, because they have a track record of handling things. They have faced difficulties and, instead of waiting to be saved, have found their own way through. They have become their own ally, their own mentor, and their own champion. Of course, this path of self-reliance, of taking full responsibility, is not always the easiest path. Forging your own way often means walking into the unknown, facing challenges head-on, and choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. It often involves leaving the familiar comfort of stagnation for the friction and uncertainty of growth. And this brings us to a critical understanding we must all face on this journey. The path of growth is by its very nature uncomfortable. And learning to not only tolerate but embrace that discomfort is the next essential piece of our Stoic education. It is there we will travel now. We have arrived at a place of profound personal power. We have accepted that the responsibility for our lives rests squarely on our own shoulders. We have made the courageous decision to stop waiting for a rescuer and to become our own agents of change, our own champions. This is the heart of a sovereign life. But as anyone who has ever tried to change a habit, learn a new skill, or walk a difficult path knows, this decision is not the end of the struggle. It is the beginning. The moment we decide to move, we encounter resistance. We feel friction. We experience discomfort. It is our natural human instinct to recoil from this feeling. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, to choose the path of least resistance. We interpret discomfort as a signal that something is wrong, that we should stop, retreat, and return to what is familiar and safe. And so, we come face to face with a crucial crossroad, a choice that determines whether we truly grow or remain stuck. This brings us to our 8th Stoic lesson, a profound reframing of this essential human experience. Change is uncomfortable, but so is staying stuck. You simply get to choose your discomfort. This is a paradox of comfort. We seek the comfort zone because it feels safe. It is the realm of the known, the predictable, the routine. But what we often fail to realize is that this so-called comfort zone has its own deep and corrosive discomfort. It is the dull ache of stagnation. It is the quiet desperation of unfulfilled potential. It is the slow creeping regret of a life half-lived. It is the discomfort of boredom, of knowing deep down that you are capable of more. This comfort is a cage with velvet bars. The Stoics understood that a life devoid of challenge is a life devoid of virtue and meaning. They saw difficulties not as unfortunate interruptions to a peaceful life, but as the very curriculum of a meaningful one. The great Stoic philosopher Seneca, in a letter to a friend grieving over a loss, provided an image that perfectly captures this idea. He wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Think of yourself as that raw, uncut gem. You possess an innate brilliance, a core of immense strength and potential. But that brilliance remains hidden, locked away within the rough exterior. How is it brought to light? Only through pressure. Only through the grinding, abrasive, uncomfortable process of being polished. The friction is not an attack on the gem. It is the very process that reveals its beauty. In the same way, the challenges, the struggles, the discomforts of life are not there to break you. They are the friction necessary to polish your character, to reveal the strength and resilience you hold within. You are always faced with a choice between two types of discomfort. On one hand, there is the acute discomfort of growth. This is the burn in your muscles when you exercise. It is the frustration of learning a new language and fumbling with grammar. It is the vulnerability of having an honest conversation. It is the fear of starting a new venture. This pain is temporary, it is purposeful, and it leads to strength, wisdom, and expansion. On the other hand, there is the chronic discomfort of stagnation. This is the weakness in your body from a sedentary life. It is the regret of never having learned that language. It is the resentment that festers from unspoken truths. It is the gnawing emptiness of never having pursued your dream. This pain is often low-grade but persistent, a slow erosion of the spirit. When you see the choice clearly, it becomes obvious. You are going to experience discomfort one way or another. The question is, which one will you choose? Will you choose the discomfort that leads to a stronger, wiser, more vibrant version of yourself, or the one that leads to weakness and regret? This principle is the foundation of so much modern therapeutic practice. In exposure therapy, for example, individuals are guided to gradually face the things they fear. The process is intentionally uncomfortable, but by staying with that discomfort, they teach their nervous system that they can handle it, and the fear begins to lose its power. By avoiding the discomfort, the fear only grows stronger. We must learn to apply this same logic to all areas of our lives. The key is to change your relationship with the feeling of discomfort itself. We need to retrain our minds to interpret it not as a stop sign, but as a growth sign. When you feel that internal resistance, that urge to retreat to the familiar, learn to greet it with a quiet nod of recognition. Ah, there it is. This feeling means I am at the edge of my current abilities. This is where the learning happens. This is the friction that polishes the gem. This changes everything. The gym is no longer a place of pain, but a laboratory for building strength. The difficult project at work is no longer a burden, but an opportunity to expand your skills. The blank page is no longer a source of terror, but an invitation to create. You stop running from the friction, and you start in a way seeking it out, knowing that on the other side of that temporary discomfort lies the person you wish to become. Of course, this constant push against our limits, this deliberate embrace of friction, requires a counterbalance. A life of nothing but struggle can lead to exhaustion and burnout. The archer cannot keep her bowstring constantly taut. It would lose its power. And so, after we have faced the discomfort and pushed ourselves to grow, we must engage in another practice. A practice of stillness, of integration, and of understanding. We must learn to step back from the field of action to truly comprehend the lessons we've learned. This vital practice of quiet introspection is our next destination. We have walked a path of immense effort together. We have embraced our own agency, deciding to be our own rescue. We have learned to face the friction of growth, to choose the purposeful discomfort of progress over the dull ache of stagnation. Understanding that the gem cannot be polished without such trials, but a life of constant effort, of relentless forward motion, without pause, can lead to its own form of blindness. The archer, who only ever shoots but never stops to check her aim, or the condition of her bow, will eventually falter. The blacksmith, who only ever hammers but never steps back to assess the shape of the blade, will create something warped and useless. Action and effort are essential, but they are only half of the equation. To truly grow, to learn from our experiences, and to cultivate genuine wisdom, we must pair our action with a practice that is in our modern, hyper-productive world, radically countercultural, a practice of stillness. This brings us to our 9th great Stoic lesson. Reflection is not a luxury. It is a superpower. Over 2,000 years before our current age of distraction, the philosopher Socrates declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. The Stoics took this principle to heart, making it a cornerstone of their daily practice. They understood that experience by itself is not the greatest teacher. It is examined experience that teaches us. We can live through the same challenges and make the same mistakes for 50 years learning nothing. Or we can live through a single difficult day and, through the power of reflection, extract a lifetime of wisdom. In our world, we are encouraged to constantly consume, to produce, to move on to the next thing. We finish one task and immediately check our email for the next. We scroll through an endless feed of information, letting the experiences of the day wash over us and disappear without a trace. We live, but we do not often digest our lives. The result is a kind of spiritual indigestion. We feel bloated with experience but are undernourished by wisdom. The Stoic remedy for this is the practice of the philosophical journal or the evening review. For men like Seneca Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, the day was not complete until they had spent a few quiet moments in conversation with themselves, reviewing their own actions, judgments, and responses. This was not an exercise in harsh self-criticism or neurotic scorekeeping. It was a calm, honest, and compassionate audit of their own character. It was their time to step back from the fray, to be the objective observer of their own lives. This practice can be structured around 3 simple but profound questions you can ask yourself at the end of each day. First, what did I do well today according to my own principles? This is not about seeking external praise. It is about acknowledging your own small victories of character. Perhaps you remained patient in a frustrating situation. Perhaps you kept a small promise to yourself. Perhaps you chose action over complaint. By acknowledging these moments, you reinforce the positive behavior. You are training yourself to notice your own virtue in action. Second, where did I fall short of my principles? Where could I have done better? This requires immense honesty, but it must be approached without shame. The goal is not to beat yourself up. The goal is to identify with the calm precision of a doctor diagnosing an illness where your actions deviated from your intentions. I lost my temper in that conversation. I procrastinated on that important task. I made a judgment based on fear rather than reason. You are simply observing the data of your own behavior. And this leads to the third and most crucial question. How could I respond more wisely if faced with a similar situation tomorrow? This is where the magic happens. This is where reflection becomes training. You are turning today's mistakes into tomorrow's preparation. You can literally rehearse a better response in your mind. The next time I feel my anger rising in a discussion, I will pause, take a single deep breath, and remember that winning the argument is not as important as maintaining my own tranquility. I will choose to listen instead of interrupting. Through this act of reflection, a failure is no longer just a failure. It becomes a lesson. It becomes a stepping stone. Imagine the cumulative effect of this practice. Day by day, you are gathering data, identifying patterns, and consciously designing your future responses. You become your own coach, your own wisest counselor. You stop living on autopilot, reacting blindly to the world, and you start living with intention, purpose, and a growing sense of self-awareness. This is the very essence of what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Reflection is the act of looking inside. It is the process of awakening. Writing in a journal is a particularly powerful form of this. When your thoughts are swirling chaotically in your head, they feel overwhelming and powerful. But the moment you transfer them to the page, something shifts. They become externalized. They become objects that you can look at, examine, and understand from a distance. The fear that seemed like a monster in your mind looks much smaller when it's just a few words on a piece of paper. You gain perspective. You gain clarity. Without this practice of reflection, our efforts to grow can be haphazard. We push, we strive, we face discomfort, but we may not fully integrate the lessons. We remain the gem undergoing the friction, but without ever stopping to appreciate the shine that is beginning to emerge. Reflection is the act of holding the gem up to the light. It is where you consolidate your gains, learn from your losses, and chart the course for the day to come. It is the quiet, steady engine of all true and lasting self-improvement. And so, we see the beautiful rhythm of the Stoic life begin to emerge. It is a dance between action and reflection, between engaging with the world and retreating to the inner citadel to make sense of it all. It is a cycle of effort and integration. And this raises our final ultimate question. Where does this cycle lead? Is there a final destination, a point at which we have arrived and the work is done? Understanding the true nature of this lifelong path is the final stone we must place in our citadel. And that is where we will conclude our journey together. We have traveled far on this inner journey together. We began by discovering our power as the architects of our own reality. We learned to observe our thoughts, confront our fears, and focus our energy like the Stoic archer with purpose and grace. We chose action over doubt, integrity over intention, and the profound responsibility of being our own rescue. We learned to embrace the friction of growth and to balance it with the quiet superpower of reflection. We have, in essence, laid the stones and built the walls of our own inner citadel. And so, we arrive at the final gate. And it is here that we must ask the ultimate question. What lies beyond it? What is the final reward for all this work? When do we graduate? When do we arrive at the destination of perfect, unshakable tranquility? The final and most liberating lesson the Stoics offer us is a quiet revolution in how we view progress itself. And it is this: mastery is a process, not a destination. The path is the goal. In our goal-oriented world, we are conditioned to think in terms of finish lines. We believe that peace, happiness, and contentment are destinations we will one day reach. When I finally master my anger, we tell ourselves, then I will be at peace. When I no longer feel anxiety, then I will have succeeded. This is a deeply ingrained illusion, what some have called the arrival fallacy. It is the belief that there is a magical there, where all our problems will be solved and the work will be finished. This belief, however well-intentioned, is a recipe for perpetual frustration. You will never arrive. The Stoics knew this. They did not see their philosophy as a curriculum with a graduation day. They saw it as a lifelong practice, a path to be walked every single day. They had an ideal, the Stoic sage, a perfectly wise and virtuous human being. But they treated this ideal not as a realistic goal, but as a guiding star, a direction to orient oneself towards not a place one ever expected to reach. Instead, they celebrated a different identity, that of the prokopton. This is a Greek term that means one who is making progress. It is the identity of the student, the apprentice, the traveler on the path. To be a prokopton is to find your satisfaction not in reaching the summit, but in the act of climbing. It is to know that you will stumble, that you will slip, that old habits will sometimes resurface. And that is perfectly okay. Success is not defined by a flawless performance. Success is defined by your commitment to continue walking the path. Let's redefine success from a Stoic perspective. Success is not never feeling anger again. It is feeling anger rise and noticing it a little sooner than you did last time. It is acting on it a little less and for a shorter duration. Success is not eliminating fear. It is feeling the fear, acknowledging it, and taking the courageous step forward anyway. Success is not a life free from external chaos, but the growing quiet confidence that whatever happens, you have the internal tools to handle it with wisdom and grace. It is not about perfection. It is and always has been about progress. Think of this journey not as a race, but as a beautiful infinite hike up a mountain. The arrival fallacy tells you that the only thing that matters is the summit. It encourages you to rush, to ignore the scenery, to curse every stumble, to feel only frustration that you are not yet at the top. But the Stoic, the pro-Copton, knows that the true value is in the climb itself. The value is in the strengthening of your legs with every step. It is in the lessons learned from navigating a treacherous patch of trail. It is in the breathtaking view you earn at the end of a difficult ascent. It is in the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other with purpose and awareness. The point of the hike is not just to reach the summit, but to be hiking. The point of this life is not just to achieve peace, but to be practicing the art of living. And so, we bring all our lessons together, not as a checklist to be completed, but as the rhythm of this beautiful hike. We understand that the terrain is not what defines our journey, but our judgment of it. Lesson 1. We learn to listen to the stories our inner narrator tells us about the path ahead. Lesson 2. We look at the shadows on the trail and see our fears not as monsters, but as creations of our own mind. Lesson 3. We focus our energy like the hiker, focusing on their footing, on what we can control and let go of the weather we cannot. Lesson 4. We know that the only way to move up the mountain is through action, one deliberate step at a time, leaving no room for doubt or complaint. Lesson 5. With each step, we build the habit of climbing, earning a deep trust in our own legs and our own resilience. Lesson 6. We realize that no one can carry us up the mountain. We are our own rescue. Lesson 7. We learn to lean into the burn in our muscles, the discomfort that signals we are getting stronger. Lesson 8. And at the end of the day, we make camp, and through reflection, we look back at the path we've traveled, learning from where we slipped, and appreciating the view we have gained. Lesson 9. This is the rhythm, it is the work, and it is the reward. The inner citadel is not a fortress you build once and then inhabit passively for the rest of your days. It is a living structure that requires daily maintenance. It is a garden that must be tended to every morning. There will be days when the weeds grow back. There will be days when the walls are battered by a storm. Your practice is not to prevent the weeds or the storms. Your practice is simply to tend to the garden, to repair the walls with patience, with diligence, and without judgment. The work is never finished. And that, in the end, is the great joy and beauty of it all. It means there is always room to grow, always a new view to discover, always a deeper sense of peace to cultivate. Thank you for walking this path with me. The journey does not end here. It begins again right now with your very next breath. And the only thing that is asked of you is to take the next right step. Stay strong, stay mindful, and continue the beautiful practice of living.